What is up, YouTube? The DNF beta has come to an official close, and personally I love the game. I had a lot of fun playing it. Let's talk about this game and what it brings to the table. So, based on my early impressions, I get the feeling I'm going to enjoy this game more than Strive in the long run. This is due to, I'd say, 4 things: the characters, the mechanics of the game, the universal mechanics, the general narrative of the game, as well as the accessibility. So let's talk about each of those points. So when it comes to the characters, everyone feels really strong, top tier with busted tools and movesets, which you might think is a bad thing, but it's not. The characters in Strive got toned back, and due to that, the players feel limited, which is, in my opinion, worse for the fighting game in the long run. This game has given back those tools, but the reason it's not as frustrating to play against is because of the universal mechanics. Now, before I talk about the universal mechanics, let's just talk about the role in each character. Like Strive, everyone feels unique in this game. The roles everyone plays also feels unique. Ranger being the best zoner, the Kinochi being a trap setup character, the grappler being the command grab character, the striker being pressure heavy, dive kick, crazy, you gotta block for days. In general, this game seems to give you a purpose with the character you pick, which I really like. The problem we have with modern day fighting games is the fact that the best characters seem to be good at everything, rather than being good at a specific thing. So what I mean by that is, in modern day fighting games, because they've watered down the special moves of characters, there's a huge focus on the normals. And if your normals aren't that good, you're usually not top tier. And of course, if you have good normals but bad specials, the character still wouldn't be considered that high on the tier list. And this is kind of what I see has happened to games like Strive and Dragon Ball. Whereas in DNF, they've given back those tools, so there's more diversity when it comes to what character can be top tier based on what tools they have, rather than being decent at everything. Crusader, for example, his buttons can't link into each other, but because his specials are busted, the character is really good. So now let's talk about the universal mechanics. There's 7 that I have in mind, which I want to elaborate on. That is the throw game, the roll mechanic, which is done by pressing forward and guard, the reversals, the lack of invincible supers, or the lack of invincibilities in supers, the easy hit confirms and execution in this game, the lack of air guard, and the wall system being a traditional 2D wall where it doesn't break. Now, modern day developers have tried to make some of these mechanics more accessible by making them easier to do, or making you get out of those situations quicker, which has caused a lot of frustrations. And I think DNF has come up with not a perfect recipe, but a much better recipe than previous games. Now, the first thing on the list, the throw game. The throw game in DNF is much more forgiving to the casual players compared to Dragon Ball and Guilty Gear Strive. In Guilty Gear Strive, throws are quite strong, so for some reason, characters can run at you almost half screen and grab you before you can actually react. The way they balanced it is they actually gave it a counter hit state if the throw is whiffed. So in essence, both sides are frustrating. If you get caught by one, it's kind of annoying, and if you whiff it, you're taking a lot of damage. So the way the DNF team have handled it is they've slowed down movement to give players a chance to react. The tech window seems a bit more generous than Strive, and if you do get a successful throw, you don't get a strong mix-up Oki like you do in Guilty Gear or Dragon Ball. Also, DNF throws seem to recover quite quick, so if you do whiff one, it's not too scary. Overall, the throw game is weaker in DNF, but it feels less frustrating to deal with than it does in other games. And number 2 is the roll mechanic. I spoke earlier about how everyone has busted moves, and the reason it's not as frustrating to deal with is because of the universal mechanics. This is one of them. The roll mechanic is essentially a move which avoids projectiles, or in fact any move. It's invincible. And so if your opponent is very good at zoning, you can just roll right through it. Obviously, you can get baited, you can get punished, but generally speaking, everyone has access to this. In other games, only certain characters had good options against projectiles, whilst everyone else had to either block it or jump, or have their own projectile. And so DNF answers it by giving everyone a reliable invincible role, which right now in some way it does justify people having these crazy special moves. Obviously it's early gameplay right now, so we don't know how the game's going to develop, but right now it doesn't feel too OP to have these crazy high block stun moves. Now let's talk about the next one, or the next two, because they sort of interlink, which is reversals and supers. Now the most common reversal in fighting games are wake up supers. Some characters have dragon punches that they could wake up with, some people have armored moves that they can wake up with. Regardless, most characters have a super that's used as a reversal. DNF has given every character a reversal and is executed in the same exact way. Wake up reversals are done by down and MS, and to balance this mechanic they've given everyone a one button super, which is the AS button, and the supers don't have any invincibility. So supers are going to end up becoming combo enders. Everyone's reversal and everyone's super is different as well. So some have more range, some start up slower, some can be grabbed, etc. So obviously when the final game comes out, we'll know, but they're both quite easy to bait and they're very consistent to punish. I do think there's one problem with the reversals though, and that is the way they are executed. The fact that it's a down motion basically means that they don't have to guess the direction of the mix-up. I think for something that's a strong tool like this, a bit more effort should be required from the user, so maybe make it a down forward motion. This kind of segues to the next topic, which is execution and hit confirms and how easy it is in this game. Probably the topic that's got the community split on this game, but my personal opinion, I don't mind the fact that the execution and the confirms are very easy, and here's why. Execution for me is one of the reasons a fighting game is fun, but it also felt like an artificial barrier from getting me to be a better player. I realized this playing Street Fighter 5 when I was playing Ken. Trying to confirm a crouching medium into a heavy DP was super hard. Initially I thought it was my reaction. When I started playing Ed, who has a 2-button special, I was very easily able to hit confirm it. And so what I realized was it wasn't the reaction, rather it was the motion that I was having trouble with. I was able to enjoy the game more and it made me a better player. So I guess the concern would be, does having easy motion take away the fun element of combos? Well, not really, because if you look at a game like Dragon Ball, a lot of the fun combos had simple motions. For example, base Vegeta loops. It's done with light punch, ki blast, with delay timings in between it. Now that's not to say that there's no limit to it. Obviously none of us want to see combos done with one button. I think legacy skill is important, but because DNF Duel is a new IP, it kind of gets away with introducing a new way of fighting, versus if Tekken, say Tekken 8, had one button electrics. There I might have a problem. Also, I feel because DNF is super lenient with their combo structure, there's going to be a lot of hard to execute combos. I would not worry too much about execution being easy. Now the last two mechanics to talk about is the lack of air guard and how the wall works in this game. Guilty Gear Strive being the latest anime fighter that I've been playing, I find that there's a flaw with the air guard mechanic, and that is essentially when you can block a DP and the consequences of that. So if you guys did not know, in the beta, if I did a DP and my opponent blocked it in the air, I was plus, which basically meant I get to keep my turn, essentially rewarding me for reacting to the jump. In the final game, however, they changed this and they made it minus, which basically meant that I felt punished for doing the correct thing if it was blocked. I also play Kai, so Kai's heavy DP is pretty bad on block. Even on jump, I can still get punished. So again, very frustrating. So because of this, Guilty Gear Strive has inconsistent situations where sometimes, depending how high the person blocked when they got DP'd, you can punish it, sometimes you can't, which is not something I'm a fan of in fighting games. Because DNF has introduced no blocking in the air, it basically means it's entirely reliant on the hit hurt box. If I do a move and the hurt box is high enough on your jump before your button comes out, you're going to get hit. Basically, it makes the game much more consistent and less frustrating for the user. So many times in Guilty Gear Strive, I thought my button should win, or I thought I should have lost, where it would leave me in a mental state where I'd be like, why did that hit, or why didn't that hit? Rather than thinking about, oh, that was a bad jump. Whereas in DNF, it's the opposite. When I jump and when I got hit by a button, I'm like, okay, yeah, that was a easy to read jump. Next time I won't be so obvious. It's a similar issue with the Guilty Gear Strive wall mechanic as well. So there's a system in place where after a certain number of hits, the wall will break. The problem is it's very hard to engage when that is in the game. And so you can't really adjust your combos to it. You got to predict it, which is super frustrating. Again, not consistent. It also removes the opportunity to have very cool dust combos, which previous iterations of the game did have. And so DNF has given back the traditional wall where it does not break. You get to loop your Oki, have your fun. And once again, the roll is there in place, the reversals are there in place to get you out of it. So all in all, it feels like a more consistent recipe, less frustrating for both players, and just more fun in general. So now that we're talking about the characters and the universal mechanics of the game, let's talk about the general narrative and how it's become more accessible for players like us. When I talk about the narrative of the game, I'm talking about the things that make fighting games fun. For me, it's 5 main things. That is the mind games, the execution, the reaction that is required, the patience or the defense, and actually watching the game, being a spectator. So when it comes to the mind games, that's essentially the high-low, the thought of what the character or the opponent's going to do next, that whole psychology of the game. There are mix-ups in DNF, but I do think a lot of the mix-ups are easy to block. A lot of the 50-50s are reactable compared to a game like Strive and Dragon Ball. Where the mix-up become difficult, I think, will be once people start exploring the conversion mechanic. But overall, it definitely feels like a more toned down version of other games with crazy 50-50s. Now, execution I already spoken about. I do think it will exist in the game. People will figure out more complicated combos that are harder to do. In terms of the fun, I think it will still exist as well. Combos are still going to be fun to do, so it's not a huge issue for me. I think if anything, it's going to be as a spectator. Seeing someone do a 1-frame link is always super hype, and obviously we know that the combos are super easy to do, so as a person who watches the gameplay, it might not be as interesting, but because visually the game is well designed, the animations are beautiful, the tool set each character has are super hype, people are still going to enjoy watching this game, especially when people start figuring out the more dirty mix-ups. Moving on to reactions, I mentioned before that the game is at a slower pace, which basically means that 50-50s are going to be easier to block. There's also a guard button, so really you're not going to be looking for cross-ups, you're going to be looking for high-lows. And of course, I feel that because the conversion mechanic hasn't been explored, that is really where the mix-ups are going to come from. But outside of the conversion mechanic, people, I think, will have a hard time opening the opponent up because the pace is much slower than previous games. This doesn't mean that people are going to block your strings forever, because there is a guard break mechanic, which essentially means that after a certain amount of time, your guard will break and you'll get hit for free. So overall, it doesn't seem like you need the sharpest of reactions to play this game. Now, speaking of guarding, let's talk about defense. I think defending in this game is much easier than other games I've played, and I don't really mind that. I think not having unreactable 50-50s doesn't mean the game's not fun. It just means players will have to focus on other areas to open up the opponent. That could be through baiting them with punishing. Obviously, as a spectator, this game is still going to be interesting to watch. Really, it's the depth that's a concern. If this game doesn't have as much depth as, say, Guilty Gear, then it might be a problem. And obviously how competitive it is, it does seem it's a bit more shallow entry level, but having an easy game does not stop there being a competitive scene. What's unique about this game is the fact they've made it accessible, and the mechanics they put in to make it accessible aren't as frustrating as previous games have done. So for example, the comeback mechanic in DNF is the super. It's not invincible, whereas with, say, Tekken 7, they have Rage Art as a comeback mechanic. Really frustrating to deal with because it's armored, and if you get hit, the less health the opponent has, the more damage the Rage Art will do. Street Fighter 5, the V-trigger mechanic, really annoying. Dragon Ball FighterZ, the limit break mechanic, horrible mechanic to deal with. Almost punishing the players for killing the opponent's characters. So yeah, generally speaking, DNF, they've taken other mechanics that other fighting games have tried to make accessible, and they've done a better job. So just to conclude this video, I do have positive feelings about this game. In terms of the competitive scene, I'm not sure how long it's going to hold up, but I definitely feel it's going to be one of the more fun fighting games to play compared to the recent games we've had come out. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the beta. If you enjoyed today's video, please consider subscribing, hit that like button, show me some love. More DNF content to come. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.